YouTube, welcome to another video. We're here in Helsinki. We're going to Ropecon at Helsinki Messikeskus. This is a 3-day convention with a ticket that costs 40 euros, and it's today, on Friday, on Saturday and on Sunday. There's a huge program, so I've favorited a bunch of the stuff that I want to see, and today the program goes on until at 1 at night. I don't think I'm gonna stay that long because the metro doesn't go for that long, but we'll see. And first we will be going to the flea toy shop. I might make that into a separate video, I don't know. So first we'll go to the toy shop and then we'll go to the convention. So I'll see you there. So Ropecon took place from the 24th till the 26th of July, and the theme of this year's convention was dreams. I will say that I have never been to a convention where so much of the program is actually super relevant to the theme, and I will also say that I think Ropecon is the convention with the largest program I have ever visited. I will link their website down below so that you can have a look at their program, but I could get several minutes of footage simply by scrolling through their program if I wanted to. There's just so much to do. I have never visited Ropecon before because I thought I'm not that into role-playing games, but there are just so many things and lectures to do that you will always find something that interests you. When I got to the venue, I wanted to find the lecture hall for one of the lectures that was starting very shortly, and I struggled hugely with that, and I wasn't the only person. There was a clear way to get to the room, but one of the corridors was shut off. There was a sign on the door saying that you can't get through, and all of the people were constantly going to that door. So this was very confusing and a very bad introduction to my convention day. I will say in hindsight that this was the only part of the convention where I felt that things were badly organized, and everything else was actually organized really well, but this just gave the convention a terrible start because everyone was confused and upset regarding how to get to that specific lecture hall. There were construction work going on in some parts of the Helsinki Messukeskus or Expo Center, which is huge. It's so huge. But some of the convention was held in a hotel and you had to go through the hotel. I did make it to the lecture hall eventually, but I had missed a good chunk of the lecture and therefore didn't film it. It was about dreams. Then afterwards I headed on to the vendors and sales area, which was huge. There was a huge selection, but to me the vendor hall is never the main reason to visit the convention, and here too I felt that a lot of the sellers were the same ones I see at every Finnish convention, and in reality there was just a lot more space to move, which is a good thing overall, but there weren't necessarily more sellers, there was just more space. And also in this massive sales hall they had both the store vendors and the artist alley, as well as the flea market and some areas for just playing games and things. And I think they also had some tables for like associations, like the Finnish Comic Book Association. The most interesting part of every vendor's hall to me is always the flea market, because that is where you can find the greatest gems, and that is also where you get the most variety. If you see the same artists and same sellers year after year, they're not gonna have that much new stock every time, especially with how much I visit conventions. But flea markets always have people's stuff for really good deals. There's always different stuff. You need to make decisions really fast, which is something I am horrible at, but overall it's really interesting. I was really tempted by this Barbie that I mentioned in another video that was 3 euros, but I ended up not getting her. She was broken, like the gimmick mechanism on her was broken. I also saw this angelic pretty blouse that you can see here. My friend actually later looked up what the blouse was called, and it was only 15 euros, so I was considering it. But obviously the next time I went back on the next day, it wasn't there anymore. Then I went to see this really interesting lecture called "We Dreamt That the World Ended." I do feel like a lot of the lecturers had kind of shoved the dream team into the lecture a little bit. Some of them even admitted it, and I don't have a problem with it. I just thought that it was funny. But this lecture was about disaster movies and the history of the disaster movies. The speaker was incredibly charismatic and incredibly easy to listen to and spoke very, very interestingly. I will say that Ropecon had a lot of English programming, which to me was very tempting. I can listen to Finnish programming with relative ease as well, but given the choice, I will usually prefer English programming because my English is even more fluent than my Finnish. I will say that I think that just comes from the fact that, again, Ropecon's programming is so huge. So there's gonna be more English programming, and there's gonna be a lot of it because there's a lot of everything. Anyways, like I mentioned, this lecture was great. There were a lot of great recommendations. I will say, I said that the thing with the rooms was the only organizational issue. No, I actually lied, sorry. We did come into one more organizational issue, which is the tech. This lecturer had heavily based their lecture on video clips that they were going to show as examples, but they didn't have sound. And they asked the person who was helping out in the room to help, and that person couldn't help, so they got someone from IT, and the IT person called someone else, and they still didn't get it to work. So in that regards, that was also a problem, and I feel really bad for the lecturer because their lecture was really well thought out and they had clearly thought things through, and I guess that took away from the lecture a bit, but honestly it didn't feel too bad. Their lecture was still so well done and it was so entertaining that I didn't as a viewer mind, but I imagine that the lecturer minded. Then I went to historical dancing. There was historical dancing sets all throughout the weekend, and a lot of them were beginner friendly. Here you can see the area where the historical dances took place, and I met a wonderful, lovely new dance partner, and we just danced the one dance because my coordination and my sense of direction is so bad. I do love historical dancing, but there's quite a lot of speed in it as well once you actually get to dancing and get past like just practicing, and you need to think about the way you're going quite a lot, and I feel like I was being such a klutz and not doing very well, so I only did one dance. Then I went on to another lecture about geopolitics and how can you make geopolitics happen within your role-playing game. I will say that this lecture went over my head. It had a lot of maths, a lot of graphs, and if you enjoy that kind of a thing and if you're a GM, I think that's actually very useful, especially if you're actually good at maths, but it did fly over my head a little bit. It was late in the evening as well, but I won't blame that. I'll blame myself fully. Still a really well done lecture, just not for me. I expected them to approach the topic maybe a little bit more from the creative side and not so much from the math and equation side, but they did, and it was still a good lecture. Then I went to listen to a lecture about ghosts and hauntings in Kainu folklore. This lecture was hosted by a museum worker and was incredibly interesting to me because I enjoy both mythology and linguistics, and this spoke about the Finnish linguistics a little bit as well and explained how some words come to be and what their meaning is, and it was super interesting to me. I really enjoyed it, and that was the end of my Friday. Some stuff went on until 1 at night, but I didn't stay until the very latest things, mainly because I was worried about getting back to my hotel because public transport does stop running at one point and I was a little bit further away from the convention center. The next day I went back there, and I am happy to report that they had done their utmost best to remedy the confusion from the other day, and they had added a lot of signage to show you how to get to the lecture halls on the second floor that we had so much trouble trying to find the first time around. So this time things were looking up. I had a look around the sales area once more. I hadn't really had a thorough look around because the sales area was so big and I didn't want to miss anything. They did have lots of Lolita brands and fashion brands as well, such as Lumria, which sells beautiful, beautiful corsets, and other interesting things as well, like makeup, which I hadn't seen at conventions a lot. I went back to see if the Angelic Pretty Blouse was still there, and it wasn't, but there was this one dress by Lady Sloth. It was 120 euros, and to me that was just a little bit too expensive to have as a impulse purchase. They also had this cotton candy feed bag, which is beautiful but clearly had some damage on the inside lining, and the Spectre doll was still there at that point. I had a look at all of the dolls to see if there was anything new, and then I just looked around at the sales area a bit. There were some lectures that I was interested in very early in the morning that I didn't end up going to because I wanted to sleep a little bit as well. On the second day, I also finally got the paper convention program, but I ended up not using it much because the online system is so good and you can favorite your favorite lectures and games and things on the online system, and it's so useful and easy to use. And because this is a role-playing convention, I felt like I had to go and try and play at least one game. So I did do just that. I went and played a game called Dreams of the Pharaoh. This was a game fully invented by the person who was running it. The game master was a pharaoh who had a dream that had various symbols, and then we as players had to interpret those dreams and could get points. It was very well done, very easy to play, a very fun game. I wholly enjoyed it, and I felt like I wasn't enthusiastic enough as I left the game to tell the game masters. So if you are watching this, please know that your game was amazing, super well done. I really enjoyed it. It was a hop on, hop off kind of game, so you could join between the rounds, but I almost played the entire game and I enjoyed it so much. For some of the games, you did have to pre-register, which I didn't know until like the last day, but it wasn't a problem because I wasn't super invested in getting into a lot of the games either. This was the one I was pretty interested in, and I'm glad I got to play it. Then I went to a lecture titled Devil Deals in Your Dreams, running devils like a lawyer but in a fun way. Again, a very charismatic lecture, a very interesting topic. Then I headed to another lecture and I was a little bit worried because the queue seemed long, but I did get in, and this lecture was a short history of survival horror. Again, super fun, super interesting, really, really enjoyed it. I'm not a huge player of horror games, but I do enjoy knowing about them and the history of them, and it was overall very, very interesting. I will say that the programming in the lecture halls was very well managed. Everything started exactly on time, everything ended exactly on time. They always made sure that everyone leaves the room when the lecture was over. Even if they wanted to listen to the next lecture, they had to queue for it. There were 15 minutes between each lecture, which was just enough time to make it to the other end of the convention center if something was in the complete other end or in the other building. In that case, you did have to hurry a little bit, but overall, there was usually just enough time. They would let people in maybe 5 minutes before the lecture started, sometimes a little bit more, but overall, it was very, very well organized. No one went overtime, and it was just really, really well done. I will say that a lot of the lecture halls were divided by curtains, and sometimes if the speakers were louder, you could hear the other lecture, which was kind of distracting, but overall it was just organized as well as it could have. Really, really impressed. Then, after the short history of survival horror, I went to listen to a lecture about LGBT teams and queer teams in X-Men. Again, a super well thought topic, a super interesting topic, super well done. X-Men, I think, as a franchise, can work as symbolism for all sorts of minorities, and this is what the lecturer themselves said as well. And it was a well done lecture, really, really interesting, really enjoyable. This was one of the few lectures I saw in Finnish. Really, really interesting, well done, and enjoyable. Then I felt I actually had to be responsible and eat a little, so I got this salad bowl with hot smoked salmon. It was really, really good. There were loads of food vendors at the venue, so there was lots of choice. There were, of course, loads of people, so in some cases you would have still had to wait quite a bit, but there were loads of choices to choose from. Then I went back to the vendors area to check it out a little bit more, and it's good that I did because I hadn't noticed that talking to myself was there, which is usually like my first place to go to. This time I hadn't noticed them so far. I only had about 15 minutes until the vendors hall was closing, and I hadn't gotten anything, and I didn't expect to find anything I wanted to get. But then at the last moment, I decided to see the long artist alley across the very, very back floor. And to my shock, there was one vendor who sold loads of Winx stuff. And I asked them if they're gonna be there the next day as well so that I'd have time to decide. And they said no. So I had to make some really quick decisions. And I think you should be very proud of me because I did. I managed to make some quick decisions and also film this beautiful, beautiful merch. Just look at these keychains. I had seen them at a previous convention where they had apparently been, but I hadn't seen the seller. I had seen people buying their stuff, and when I had asked where they had gotten it, it was one of the places where there was a huge line to get in. And also the artist at that time, at that convention, was also there for just the one day. So I didn't manage to get it. So I was super happy to catch this seller now and to see that they still had so much Winx stock. Just after I had gotten my purchases, they basically closed the sales area down. You can see that there was quite a lot of room there and people were already clearing. I chatted with some of my friends a little bit and then decided to queue up for the next mythology themed lecture that had mermaids and nixes and that kind of things in Finnish folklore. And I was super interested and excited and not very worried because the last time the queue had seemed really long as well, but we had all fit in. But indeed, this time the queue was too long, and this was a 1.5 hour long lecture, and I decided I didn't want to wait for the next stuff I was interested in, which would have been very, very late, and went home instead. But I'm sure you're all interested in seeing the Winx stuff that I did purchase, so here. I got these free stickers. They had all of the 6 girls, as you could see from the clip, and they're all sparkly and lovely holographic. I don't think it comes out as much on camera, but they're really nice and sparkly. And then I got this Polaroid with Musa, Aisha and Stella, and I love how Stella is doing the little victory sign here. And then I got this beautiful, beautiful Enchantix Blooms, Enchantix Wings key charm, which looks absolutely awesome. And I'm so happy that I got these, and that's all I purchased, at least on Saturday. This brings us to the final day of the convention, and I hadn't really talked about the space other than the fact that it's huge. I will say the nice thing about the huge space is that there's loads of space everywhere. Nowhere was cramped despite thousands of people. I heard someone estimate that the convention might have around 11,000 visitors, and you really couldn't feel it in a sense that nowhere was crowded or too cramped. I started my day in checking out the artist alley once more, making sure that I don't miss anything super fun this time. And yeah, there was plenty of space to look around. I will say that this means that you can look at the stuff from very far and you don't have to go near the sellers. I also found another seller that had Winx art, so I filmed that as well, even though I didn't end up getting that Winx art. I tend to hold off on getting prints overall because I just don't have anywhere to put them, but the art was still absolutely gorgeous. Then I headed back to the flea market area and had a look at one purple velvet jacket that I had looked at previously on previous days as well, but decided not to get it. Then I headed on to another lecture. This lecture was about clothes in game worlds and using clothes when building game worlds. It was very, very interesting. They talked a lot about the history of fabrics and clothes. This hall was a silent lecture hall, so they had headphones you would put on and listen, and the halls next to it were speaking halls. So I'll admit you could still hear through the headphones as well, and to me the headphones were kind of painful as well, but still I think the idea of it was really cool and interesting, and the lecture was interesting as well. Then I listened to another lecture about dreams and insomnia in the Middle Ages. This was done by a researcher archaeologist who also seems to be an author, because at the end of the lecture they promoted their own books. So I think that they are also an author. This was really, really interesting. Again, they talked about the books from Middle Ages about dreams and interpreting dreams and some examples of dreams and some remedies for sleeplessness. Highly enjoyed it. Then I had to make a brisk walk outside to make it to another building in Holiday Inn, to make it to that infamous hard to find lecture hall, which wasn't so hard to find anymore, to hear a lecture about Mary Shelley's life. The screen wasn't blinking that way in real life. I'm not sure why it's like that on the video. I hope that this isn't a problem for anyone watching, but I will put a little blinking lights warning just before. That was again a very enjoyable, very fun lecture. The speaker was super charismatic, and it was honestly one of the funnier lectures I listened to, because of the way they spoke was really catchy and really entertaining, and I felt like people enjoyed that a lot. So I really, really enjoyed that. Here I'm giving you some views of the overall halls so that you can understand how big it really was. Then it was time for my last lecture of the day, and indeed some of the last lectures of the convention, All-Time Vampire Tales. There was a huge demand for this lecture as well, as I got the second to last seat in this lecture hall. So I'm very, very happy that I did. And that marked the ending of the convention. There was still about an hour left with the closing ceremony, but I had to go and catch my train. Overall, this was my first time at the Ropecon, and I highly, hugely recommend that you check this convention out. There's a huge sales area if you love that. The lecture programming is mind-blowing, and obviously if you love role-playing games, there's just so much for you here. The system where you can favorite stuff on the website, so you can basically put together your own program, is super, super good and convenient as well. You do have to sign up for some of the games, which wasn't something I did, but I'm sure that works well as well. I heard that there was a lottery system, so if any of that is something that you enjoy, make sure to check out the Ropecon. The ticket was 40 euros, but well worth it for the program that they had. It was really, really great. I really enjoyed it. If you were at Ropecon and you saw me, let me know in the comments down below. I do a lot of other convention content pretty regularly on this channel as well. So if that is something that interests you, make sure to subscribe, leave this video a like, and I'll see you in another video. Bye!